Aussies love dual cab utes, and the Jeep Wrangler is unlike any other dual cab alternative that you can buy in Oz right now. Essentially, it's a pickup, and it is a pickup, not a ute, that takes the long wheelbase Wrangler and stretches it even further while tacking a tub on the rear end. So the Gladiator is essentially a bit of a Frankenstein and a very American solution to a dual cab question. So it really is quite different in formula, say, to a Ranger Raptor, which the Americans call a mid-size pickup, or an F-150, which you'd call a large pickup. Of course, you could cross-shop it with all manner of dual cabs, but it really is a motoring fringe dweller that appeals to a particular kind of a buyer. So what is it and who does it appeal to? Well, let's find out. Chasing cars. Honest reviews of your next car.
Brought to you by
The Jeep Gladiator is a concept that some Aussies do struggle to get their heads around because it's not a commercial vehicle at all, or at least it's not pitched by Jeep to be a commercial vehicle. In fact, it's just a big toy. You see, dual cabs do so well in Australia partly because they do a little bit of everything reasonably well. They're reasonable family haulers, they're pretty decent at off-road, they can lug a ton of bricks and also tow a pretty hefty caravan, and it keeps the taxman happy. The Gladiator is more singularly focused because it takes the hardcore off-roading Ranger Rubicon and basically just tacks a tub onto the back of it. That's a big difference because this thing is all about big adventure. It's not to say that you couldn't use the Gladiator as a tradie truck because it can lug 700 kilos in the tray here. Although rather than tools and lumber, this cargo area is really meant for dirt or mountain bikes or some camping swag. And besides, for the Gladiator's $87,250 outlay, there are tens of thousands of your hard-earned dollars invested in some of the most hardcore off-road running gear available as original equipment. So just using it as a tradie truck does seem like a bit of a waste. It's worth adding that at the time of review, Jeep was doing a smoking Driveaway offer of $82,950 on MY22 plated runout. So where's the lion's share of that investment? Well, let's start at the engine bay. So it all starts with Mopar's evergreen, and I use that term very carefully, all-alloy 3.6 litre Pentastar petrol V6. It outputs 209 kilowatts and 347 newton meters, and it's not the newest or smartest engine on the block. But in Jeep lore, it is tried, true and dependable, and it will run on 91 RON or E10. It's paired with a heavy-duty 8-speed automatic, and in Rubicon spec downstream from there, things start to get pretty serious. The Rubicon gets what's called a rock track on-demand 4x4 system, and it's more hardcore than what is fitted to the lower grade Night Eagle. Also exclusive to the Rubicon is an Off-Road Plus drive mode. It fits True-Lock electronically controlled locking diffs front and rear that can be locked individually using a switch in the cabin. It's all paired with a 4:1 transfer case that allows for a ridiculous 77.1 crawl ratio. And the torque is plied through heavy-duty Dana axles. For added trail readiness, there's an electronic disconnect for the front sway bar for extra wheel articulation. And speaking of suspension, it uses Fox-branded aluminium 2-inch off-road dampers. And rounding out its hardcore off-roading credentials quite literally are these massive 32-inch mud kickers. Again, it's a recreational toy, not a work truck, and unless your work site is well deep into the wilderness, all this 4x4 gear is going to be a bit of a waste. Right, let's check out the interior. Climb in, and you do have to climb in, and you do get a nice reassuring clank from the door like you get in a Land Cruiser 70 series or a G-Wagon. The cabin's quite narrow and everything's very square and bluff, but it does feel like it's ready for some pretty serious off-road work. Everything's minted in rubber and hard plastic with a few splashes of metal, and it's as if it was designed by Bunnings, but not necessarily in a bad way. You can remove the roof and the doors and even drop the windshield, and there is a sense that after a muddy day playing around in the bog, you could actually clean this out with a gurney, although that's not really that advisable. Why? Because despite appearances, it's actually more upmarket in here than you might expect. The seats in here aren't vinyl, but instead are trimmed with McKinley leather. And although the 8.4-inch touchscreen system is a little bit petite, it is fully formed and you get sat-nav, smartphone mirroring and premium audio. There is, however, no 360-degree or forward camera system, which might be a little bit handy when you're trying to negotiate 5.6 metres worth of truck through the mulga. Somewhat handier are the elastic door bins that really secure your drinks and your oddment when the Jeep's rocking around off-road. And there are enough grab handles around the place here for an eager octopus. The window switches are actually in the center stack, as well as all the controls for the various off-roading party tricks. I really do like the frosted red inserts here and some of the red on the switchgear that does help give the cabin a bit of a lift. The same goes for the red tinged Analogue instrumentation, which is a bit old school but really does add to the Rubicon's charm. Less charming, however, are these seats. They are quite uncomfortable, and these seat backs are like you're leaning back on an ironing board. Another bugbear is the footwell, because the transmission tunnel is so wide that there's really nowhere logically to put your left foot. So that's the front end, let's check out the rear. There's that satisfying clank again. From the outside you think it's going to be pretty claustrophobic and small in the back here, but once you're in here there is actually plenty of room. A little more disconcerting though is this big roll cage that's quite close to your noggin and these fully 6 subwoofers just above your head. You do get handy map pockets, rear air vents, again the window switches are in the centre, and these cup holders which aren't going to be much help to you when you're on the off-road trail. Realistically, there's only enough room for 2 adults in here, and this centre position is actually very uncomfortable. However, you do get this neat little sliding glass window to see into the tray. Right, let's get down to business and take it for a drive. Let's get one thing straight. When it comes to ultimate refinement and comfort, you've probably come to the wrong place when it comes to the Jeep Gladiator. However, for something as conspicuously hardcore as the Rubicon, it is surprisingly good in a couple of areas. For one thing, those Fox off-road dampers are really compliant and actually make for some fundamentally good ride quality. And those massive mud-kicking tyres tends to smother potholes and speed bumps in the same way that it does the ruts and the rocks when you're out on a trail. The petrol V6 is actually fairly quiet, and it's nice not to constantly listen to diesel chatter, although that's really where the plaudits for the V6 end, at least on road. Again, it's quite a thirsty engine, and that 347 Newton meters does arrive high up at 4100 RPM, so you do have to rev it a fair bit to get moving. It is also hauling 2¼ tons of metal, glass and rubber, so performance is hardly what you would call stunning. But paired with the 8-speed auto on-road and in a high range, it is fairly effortless. In the context of hardcore off-roaders, it's not nearly as visceral as the latest twin-turbo petrol Ford Ranger Raptor. But by the same token, it's not nearly as slow and as agricultural as Toyota's 70 Series Land Cruiser. So you can consider it a nice middle ground. Jeep is stuck with a time-honoured recirculating ball steering system rather than the more contemporary rack and pinion design, and it is a little bit vague and sloppy off-centre. However, it does feel to me a little bit tighter and more direct than the system that they fit in the Wrangler Rubicon, which is kind of strange. Also strange is a fluttering sensation at low speed or when you come to a standstill, and that is the knobbly tyres. It is something that you do get used to, and it does really become part of the character of the Gladiator Rubicon experience. I know what you're thinking. A lot of this doesn't really matter when you're elbow deep in mud when you're off-roading, but truth is that a lot of owners do spend most of the time on sealed roads. And there are plenty of urbanites who might want to drive around in one of these as a daily driver and keep all the mud-kicking adventure stuff for the weekends. Another thing many Gladiator owners might want to do is tow, and it can tow 2.7 tons braked, which isn't quite as much as a Land Cruiser, but is still pretty handy. Outright grip from these mud tyres can get a little bit negligible at times, but it is good to know that outside of trying to negotiate a multi-story car park, it is actually quite easy to live with a Gladiator. Even if, as I've learned the hard way, it is a little bit of a challenge trying to park this thing in tight spaces. Right, so it goes pretty well on-road, so let's see how it goes off-road right now. It's perhaps unsurprising that the Gladiator actually feels more at home off-road than it does on-road. There's a huge amount of grip for these mud tyres, and thus far I haven't really found a need to activate four-wheel drive, or low range for that matter. Now, this isn't the world's most challenging off-road course, but it will give us a bit of a taster as to what this Gladiator is capable of. So one thing is the steering. So when it's on a sealed surface, it can feel a little bit vague and sloppy, but here off-road, it does allow a fair amount of pinpoint accuracy in the steering when you're basically negotiating ruts and moguls. And while that V6 does feel quite lazy on road, it really does come into its own, particularly with its high torque point when it comes to low speed maneuvering. Right, we've got a bit of a descent, so let's check out the low range. All right, we'll see how we go up this embankment without any of the diffs locked, but in low range. Oh, it's easy. I'll go over some of this rougher maneuver. Again, the throttle's nice and pliant and there's just plenty of accuracy and control. And it just romps over it. All right, so far, so excellent in 4 low. So let's put it in a 4 high and get a bit of speed up. And locking the diffs in 4 low gives you unrelenting traction. Well, in 4 high with a bit of speed on, it is actually pretty effortless, and even despite going through these ruts, it's actually pretty comfortable in here. You don't need to sort of grab onto the grab handles to sort of anchor yourself. And again, there's enough grip from these tyres, which are a little wider than the ones you can get on the Night Eagle, going downhill, and there's really no need for hill descent control or anything like that. All right, so now we've stopped in a bit of a mud bog, so let's see what traction's like trying to get out of it. It's easy. And one more time over the log maneuver in 4-wheel drive to just see how it goes. It just powers straight over the top. Much like the Wrangler Rubicon, the approach and departure angles are very decent. However, that 3.5 metre wheelbase does mean that its breakover angle is pretty shallow. I don't want to go over any humps that are too sharp, just in case this Gladiator Rubicon sort of beaches itself on its rock sliders. Do that and we'll have to find someone with a winch to pull us out. There's one thing that really does underpin the off-roading experience is that the Gladiator Rubicon does feel like a safe companion. In one sense, the Gladiator is one of the safest cars on the road because at 5.6 metres in length and bright red, you'll see it from a country mile before you're likely to hit it. More formally though, it only rates 3 stars with ANCAP. Active safety includes forward AEB, blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert, but those really just cover off the basics. But the big consideration is that there are just 4 airbags, 2 front, 2 front side, and none for the rear occupants. So yes, it's a big tough truck with lots of safety and capabilities off-road, but it's really not our first pick as an ideal family hauler. Next up is ownership, and the warranty is a fairly typical 5 years, although it does come with a mileage cap of 100,000 kilometres. Servicing is every 12 months or 12,000 kilometres, capped at $399, so it's no more expensive to service than a Cherokee or a Wrangler. Insurance, in the past 12 months, the medium budget direct customer spent $1,352 to comprehensively insure a new Jeep Gladiator. Everybody's situation is different and your premium will vary based on things insurers take into account, like where you live, how you drive, and where you garage your car. Fuel consumption, well, it's a fairly high 12.6 litres combined, and around town that sails north of 15 litres, and that's the official claims. So far in our own testing, those claims are actually pretty genuine in the real world, although it is going to skyrocket when you start taking it off-road at low speed. Again, it will run on crappy 91 RON fuel, and you do get a large 83 litre tank, so touring range is about 660 kilometres. Of the glut of dual cab pickups on Aussie roads these days, the Jeep Gladiator Rubicon certainly isn't the nicest, most well-rounded or the hardest working. But it is focused, fun-filled and absolutely dripping with charisma, which is why it's fast become one of my favourite vehicles of recent times. What I've affectionately nicknamed Truckosaurus is unabashedly a toy, and that is the best part about it. And that it's unabashedly hardcore only goes further to fulfill its mission statement. If you're after sensible motoring as a family hauler with a bit of adventure, there are probably smarter options out there. But that doesn't take away from a machine with so much character that makes even a trip to the shops for a bottle of milk a grin-inducing event. That's what I think and feel, but what about you? Put your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe while you're at it, and as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.